Labour would inherit an eye-wateringly tight fiscal position, but that didn't stop Reeves affecting to be surprised. Nobody else was. Weeks of being elected, Chancellor Rachel Reeves claimed to have discovered a £22 billion fiscal black hole left behind by the dastardly Tory. PR and the IFS had already warned that
Rachel Reeves, Labour's economic mastermind, just had her worst nightmare come true on live TV. Andrew Neil, known for his razor-sharp interviews, didn't just ask tough questions, he demolished her entire economic plan. Want to know how $22 billion suddenly vanished from Labour's budget? Or why Reeves couldn't explain how they'd fund their promises without hurting working families? This isn't just another political gaffe. It's a train wreck that could derail Labour's entire campaign. The anticipation was palpable as Rachel Reeves, Labour's shadow chancellor, strode into the studio.
You know, they have had to write off already £90 million worth of expending.
I'm not on the rights and the wrongs. I'm trying to work out what you voted for at the moment. We'll come on to some of these issues.
Well, some of the things...
You voted against that in the third reading.
Well, we voted against some of the specifics around what they're doing.
You voted against it.
Look at their universal credit.
Her confidence was evident, buoyed by months of touting Labour's economic vision. But little did she know that Andrew Neil, the veteran broadcaster known for his forensic questioning, was about to turn her world upside down. As the cameras rolled, Neil wasted no time. His opening salvo caught Reeves off guard, immediately pressing her on the specifics of Labour's fiscal plans. Ms. Reeves, you've promised to balance the books. Can you tell us exactly how you'll achieve this without raising taxes on working families? Neil's piercing gaze bore into Reeves as she fumbled for an answer. Reeves's initial responses were a mix of rehearsed talking points and vague assurances. She spoke of growing the economy and closing tax loopholes, but when Neil pushed for concrete numbers, the cracks in her armour began to show. Her usual composure wavered as she struggled to reconcile Labour's ambitious spending promises with their pledge for fiscal responsibility.
the air is thick with what taxes will rise. Employers' national insurance contributions? Almost certainly, since that could bring in an extra $12 billion.
Economic experts watching the interview were quick to point out the inconsistencies. Dr. Sarah Thompson, a respected fiscal policy analyst, noted, Labour's promises sound great on paper, but the numbers simply don't add up. They're promising increased public spending while simultaneously claiming they won't raise taxes. It's economically impossible. As the interview progressed, viewers could sense a pivotal moment approaching. Neil, like a seasoned chess player, had been setting up his pieces, and now he was ready to make his move. He leaned forward, a glint in his eye, and asked the question that would define the entire exchange. Ms. Reeves, can you explain the $22 billion discrepancy in your budget projections? The silence that followed was deafening. Reeves's face paled as she realized the trap she had walked into. Her stammered response about unforeseen economic factors and inherited deficits only served to highlight her lack of preparedness. In that moment, Labour's economic credibility began to crumble on live television. As the dust settled on this explosive interview, the implications for Labour's campaign became clear. Their carefully crafted image as the party of fiscal responsibility lay in tatters. The question now on everyone's lips was, how could Labour possibly recover from this devastating blow to their economic credentials? Just when Rachel Reeves thought the worst was over, Andrew Neil dropped a bombshell that would haunt Labour for months to come. Ms. Reeves, he began, his voice steady, can you explain where this $22 billion figure came from? Her response would leave viewers stunned. The $22 billion fiscal black hole had become the elephant in the room of British politics. Labour had been quick to point fingers, claiming they'd inherit this massive deficit from the Tories. It was a convenient narrative, painting themselves as the responsible adults ready to clean up the mess. But as Neil dug deeper, the story began to unravel. Neil's questioning was relentless. He pressed Reeves on the origins of this figure, demanding specifics. How had it seemingly doubled overnight? Where were the calculations? Reeves' confident demeanour from earlier in the interview crumbled. She fumbled through vague explanations about unforeseen economic factors and inherited deficits, but the numbers just weren't adding up. As Reeves struggled, financial experts weighed in. Paul Johnson from the Institute for Fiscal Studies didn't mince words. Anyone who cared to look could see the fiscal situation pre-election. This statement cut through Labour's claims of surprise, suggesting either incompetence or deliberate misdirection. The implications of this fiscal gap were staggering. How could Labour promise to protect working families while simultaneously seeking tax increases to address it? Neil hammered this point home, exposing the contradiction at the heart of Labour's economic strategy. Reeves's inability to provide clear answers only fueled speculation about potential tax hikes that would hit the very people Labour claimed to champion. As the interview progressed, it became clear that this wasn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It was about trust. Labour's carefully crafted image as the party of fiscal responsibility was crumbling in real time. Viewers watched as Reeves, once hailed as Labour's economic saviour, failed to defend her party's most basic financial projections. The fallout from this exchange was immediate and far-reaching. Labour's economic competence, the cornerstone of their campaign, had been called into question on national television. As the dust settled, one thing became clear. Labour's grand promises for the future now rang hollow in the face of their present-day economic confusion. Labour's economic credibility was in tatters, but Andrew Neil wasn't finished. He turned to a cornerstone of their campaign, a promise that had won over millions. "Let's talk about protecting working families," Neil began. What followed was a masterclass in political dismantling that left viewers questioning everything they thought they knew about Labour's plans. Labour had made a bold promise to ease the cost of living crisis, a pledge that resonated deeply with voters struggling to make ends meet. It was a commitment that painted Labour as champions of the working class, ready to stand up against economic hardship. But as Neil began his questioning, it became clear that this promise was built on shaky ground. Neil's line of inquiry was relentless. He pressed Reeves on the specifics of how Labour planned to fund and implement their cost of living relief measures. As Reeves fumbled for answers, it became painfully apparent that the party's economic strategy was full of contradictions. She spoke of protecting pay slips and supporting families, but her words rang hollow in the face of Neil's scrutiny. Fact-checkers and economic experts were quick to weigh in. They pointed out that Labour's actions didn't align with their promises. Despite claims of easing financial burdens, Labour-led initiatives had actually resulted in tax increases, including a controversial national insurance hike. These measures directly contradicted their pledge to protect working families' incomes. As the interview progressed, a major contradiction emerged that left viewers stunned. Neil highlighted how Labour's supposed commitment to easing the cost of living was at odds with rising inflation and increased tax burdens under their watch. Reeves struggled to reconcile these conflicting realities, her responses sounding more like damage control than genuine solutions. The revelation was damning. Labour's flagship promise to support working families was exposed as little more than empty rhetoric. Their policies, when scrutinised, seemed to hurt the very people they claimed to champion. As Neil pointed out, the public wasn't buying into Labour's narrative anymore. The disconnect between their words and actions had created a credibility gap that was growing by the minute. This exchange didn't just expose one broken promise, it revealed a broader pattern of inconsistencies in Labour's platform. From economic policies to social reforms, their campaign began to look like a house of cards, ready to collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. As the interview drew to a close, viewers were left wondering, if Labour couldn't be trusted on this fundamental issue, what else in their manifesto didn't add up? In the aftermath of Reeves's disastrous appearance, a question hung in the air like a storm cloud. Had Labour just handed the next election to their opponents on a silver platter? The answer would shock even the most jaded political observers. The fallout from the Andrew Neil interview was swift and merciless. Labour's spin doctors scrambled to control the narrative, issuing statements about contextual misunderstandings and long-term economic visions. But their efforts were like trying to plug a dam with a finger. Public opinion was already flooding against them. Criticism came from all sides. Conservative MPs gleefully tore into Labour's economic plans, calling them a house of cards built on quicksand. More worrying for Labour, though, was the backlash from their own supporters. Lifelong Labour voters took to social media, expressing their disillusionment and anger. How can we trust them with the economy if they can't even explain their own figures? Became a common refrain. The impact on Labour's poll numbers was immediate and devastating. Overnight, their lead evaporated. Public trust in their economic competence plummeted to levels not seen since the 2008 financial crisis. Political analysts pointed out that Labour's entire election strategy was now in jeopardy. Their carefully crafted image as the party of fiscal responsibility lay in ruins. But the consequences of this credibility crisis ran even deeper. Labour's decision to block elections in certain counties, allegedly due to slipping ratings, caused an uproar. It was seen as a desperate move to cling to power, further eroding public trust. The party that once promised transparency and accountability now appeared to be running scared from the voters. As the dust settled, experts began to weigh in on Labour's future prospects. Dr. Emma Thompson, a political scientist at Oxford, didn't mince words. If Labour cannot turn their promises into action, their support could slip even further. They're facing an uphill battle to regain credibility before the next election. The implications for British politics were profound. With Labour's economic platform in tatters, voters were left wondering who could they trust to guide the country through uncertain economic times. As the opposition floundered, the government seized the opportunity to push through its own agenda, unchecked. The balance of power had shifted, and the political landscape of Britain would never be the same. The Andrew Neil interview exposed deep cracks in Labour's economic strategy. Reeves's inability to explain the £22 billion fiscal hole or defend Labour's contradictory policies left viewers questioning the party's competence. This disastrous appearance highlighted a crucial truth in politics. Economic credibility is the bedrock of public trust. Labour's fumbled responses and evasive tactics didn't just damage their reputation, they potentially reshaped the political landscape. With their fiscal promises in tatters, voters are left wondering who can truly guide Britain through uncertain economic times. The fallout from this interview raises a pressing question. Can Labour rebuild their economic credibility before the next election? Or have they handed their opponents an insurmountable advantage? As the dust settles, one thing is clear. In the court of public opinion, empty promises and vague assurances no longer cut it. Voters are demanding substance over spin, and Labour's future may hinge on their ability to deliver just that.